This show was first broadcast on Free FM, Hamilton, New Zealand's community access media organisation. For more information on our lineup of shows and the role we play in the media, visit freefm.org.nz.
Hi, kia ora, hello and welcome to BackChat with James King on Free FM. This is your weekly discussion program talking about local, national and international issues. If you'd like to be part of the show, just email me, jamesking2020@gmail.com. I'd love to have your feedback, your comments, your questions, your queries, criticisms and of course your observations. On today's show we discuss well-being, isolation and grief during the Christmas season with our resident expert Dr. Alexander Stevens II. But first, if you do have a need for support, whether it be depression, anxiety, grief or mental illness, go to standingtallnz.org and click on the support and resources page. Christmas is a time of excitement and joy for many, but for others may prefer to sleep through the family gathering, avoiding triggers of grief following a particularly painful year. Alexander is here to discuss the topic. First, Alexander, what's your background?
Season's felicitations, James. My background is diverse. So I am a qualified counsellor. I specialise in trauma, specifically sexual violence and family harm. I work in the mental health and addictions sector as a qualified addictions therapist. I'm also a rongoa practitioner, kaupapa Māori researcher. I'm diverse, but ultimately what I tell people at events is I'm just someone that's really interested in Māori health and well-being.
What inspired you to pursue the current profession?
Two things. One was just looking at the rates of our health across the board, and so unfortunately Māori are gold medalists in lots of areas. Can I also be clear that's not necessarily our fault? There's a lot of factors that are involved in that statement. And I guess for me, if I was going to play a selfish card, I actually wanted to work in a field that I knew wasn't going to be jeopardised by other competing things, you know, and working across different sectors. And can I also say to you, studying my butt off to get to where I am has enabled me to work broadly across the areas that I want to be in.
Well, what have you got, 32 quals?
I've got 32 quals. And you know what, James? Next year I've decided to do a second PhD.
Of course.
One's
never enough.
No, it's not, especially if you're into feng shui, and I want to have partners, so I've decided to do it in theology, but that's a whole different discussion. But yes, thank you, sir.
What is the most exciting project you're currently working on?
So there's two projects that I'm working on. One is about supporting our men who have not only been affected by sexual violence, but who have also grown up in domestic violent homes as children and commit violence against others. So can I be clear that just because you have grown up in an violent household doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to commit violence to other people? But it just so happens that the men that I do work with, some, especially around domestic violence, have experienced extensive violence growing up. So we're creating new resources to help them to understand the impacts that it has on them, their children, their loved ones in the greater community, and be able to create online content that kind of guides them through in terms of how can they get help for themselves, what could external help look like. As you know, there's huge shame involved in terms of men wanting to reach out, especially if you've committed some kind of offence against another person. I will say that I feel like New Zealand is much harder on men than it is women, and so one of the projects that I'm looking forward to is being able to have this out by the end of the year. And then the other project that I'm really excited about is kind of wrapping up a few little areas of research that I'm doing around sexual violence, specifically understanding the experiences of our Māori and Pacific men, because that gap in the research is quite significant, which is one of the reasons why I did my first PhD. to be able to help bridge that gap and, of course, inform the sector and indeed the country.
So what was your first PhD?
My first PhD... well, how can I put it to you? My first PhD set out to do similar things. One, it was to understand the experiences of our Māori and Pacific men who'd been sexually abused as childhood. The second part of my PhD looked at interviewing support people, which again, James, huge gap. You know, how do we support people?
Right.
And to me, actually, that specific area was something I'm really passionate about because in the mental health field, we know that one support person can be enough to support a person who is unwell. And I wanted to understand, actually, I wonder if that's also true for someone who's experienced sexual abuse. And it turned out, same deal. Absolutely same deal. And then the third thing I noticed that online support regarding our men was sparse. And I decided to create a digital platform which hadn't been done before. And to be fair, anyone can create a digital platform, but I did it under a kaupapa Māori approach, a methodology approach, to actually understand, well, do our communities access online technology? What would they want to have? What would they want to access? What would that look like for them? And some of that stuff is, you know, those projects that I'm writing up on, because it is groundbreaking stuff. Quick example, if you go onto some of those websites, there are pictures of women predominantly covering their faces and leaning into corners, and people would see those and would feel really disconnected. It just didn't make sense to them. And yet these websites were dedicated to helping all people, apparently, but they weren't inclusive. So then given that, what would it look like? And that's what my research focused on. And it was amazing, James. And can I also say to you as a pat on my own back and perhaps my own little present, is that I passed that thesis with flying colours, so there weren't any changes that needed to be made, and it's only 1% of the population that could achieve that. So it really helped me because the subject matter is so hard, and having done it for over 15, closer to 20 years, it was a nice validation, I guess, of being recognised for the work that I do.
Can it be turned into a book?
That's something that I am looking at doing. In fact, I'm looking at doing 2 books. So,
wow.
So that's one of the projects that I am thinking about, because again, there is nothing in this country. If we look in particular Māori and Pacific men's health, not really, in terms of availability of things. So I'm really interested about helping to change some of that landscape, and then look at other areas of masculinity across the board, not necessarily based on ethnicity. And I guess I'm really interested in Māori and Pacific primarily because that's my background. But we also know, statistically speaking, Māori first, then Pacific, when it comes to our men, feature highest in statistics.
And what makes you say that we're harder on men than women?
Because in New Zealand in particular, there's this kind of harden up attitude. In fact, that's often what's said, you know. I've heard things like, you know, swallow a concrete pill, harden up, you know, you're a pussy, we don't talk about it. And as a country, there's something to be said about the perception of how we should treat men, as somehow we are immune to everything, that we should be void of our feelings and emotions. And that's just simply, to me, bollocks, James. It doesn't make sense to me that this is the way that we think, generally speaking, as a country, because we know that the rates of our suicides, addictions and mental health are incredibly high when we look at our men. We know that violence in men does feature highly. Now, violence doesn't come out of, you know, nowhere. It comes out of often repression. It often comes from a lack of getting support. Can I also say to you, it's not an excuse, but just helping to understand the greater context.
It's not an excuse, but it's a reason. And I think that's the key matter, is what are the reasons behind some of these things.
Yes, absolutely. And what's also key, if I can totally support what you're saying, is that men communicate differently to women. And I think that's something that's often overlooked. So I used to do couples therapy. This was a long time. It was the shortest job I've ever had, actually. I think I did it for less than 6 months.
If you want to get a divorce, go into couples therapy.
Which is ironic, because I also am a celebrant as well. So, you know, I could perhaps cover both, but no, seriously. One of the things that I realised was that women were frustrated that men weren't communicating in a way that they used to, but the reality is men do things differently. As an example, and having worked with thousands of men close to 20 years, James, men actually need time to kind of process. They need time to step back. You know, if for example, if they're walking away from you and you're having a heated argument, let them walk away from you. You know, going up to them and saying things like, "You'll tell me right now what you think," or "You're ignoring me." You know, what you're actually doing is ignoring the signs of what they're wanting to do. Yeah, the signals, the signs, which is give me space, give me time to process. This is often actually what guys have said, and having supported men through like anger management programs or writing court reports for them, again, not an excuse, but they've said, look, if I'd just been given time out, just time to process, time to go for a walk, time to be with my bros, I could actually kind of process what's happening. And so these things really aren't being done in a very clear and transparent way.
I think it's worth repeating that men do communicate.
Yes.
Men are effective communicators.
Yes.
When they're given the space and time and respect to do so.
100%. The Māori word is wa, and wa literally means space and time. And that's what I would encourage people to do. Give men the wa, the space and time to process, to kind of figure stuff out. Generally speaking, with my own bros, for example, we kind of have a rule that to try to come back if we don't necessarily see eye to eye within 24 hours. So at least we know that that's the kind of space to be able to process, even if we haven't kind of figured some stuff out. Being able to text a person and say, actually, look, I'm still not in a good space, I'll get back to you tomorrow. It's far better than kind of pestering them to try to give them an answer, or elicit an answer, I should say, when actually you would be much better off to be respectful. And I guess that's the thing, let's be respectful in terms of how we engage.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about support people and what sort of ways we could support them.
So support people are absolutely vital across the board. This is an area that I'm really interested in looking into in the next, say, 24 months, James. So let's take sexual violence, for example, or indeed mental health. What are the factors that lead people to tell somebody else, you know, I have schizophrenia, I have depression, I have anxiety. Pray that you don't have all of those things at the same time, you know, or I've been sexually abused. What is it that has led you to tell this other person? Is it just a random chance? Is it the way that they engage with you? We know that generally speaking, people tend to kind of reach out to family members initially, but if they don't get support from, say, their siblings or their parents, then where do they go? We know that, say in my PhD research, I knew that those men had tried to go up to other people 4 or 5 different times and then shut down until their early 30s, where they then felt that they had to change their behaviour or something had come along, like they were going to be a dad for the first time, so they tried again. And what research I have been able to do shows that support people come from all shapes and forms, different backgrounds, but the key function or the key thing that keeps coming up time and time again is just being a genuine person who genuinely cares and wants to do their bit. They don't know what to do exactly at that point in time, but they want to help.
That's where standingtallnz.org comes into it.
Great plug, and thank you, James. And it does come in because actually it's one of the very few websites in this country that specifically provides resources for support people, and that's the point of difference from, say, other websites that are available. We only tend to kind of focus on that person who might have depression or has been affected by sexual abuse. But Standing Tall really is aimed to be a digital wraparound approach where we look at supporting people, primarily men who've been affected by abuse, then support people, and then also community agencies that might get a disclosure and don't know what to do. For example, last week I was contacted by a budgeting service who had been given a disclosure from their client and didn't actually know how to engage with this person, had seen the website and wanted some information.
Right. On a personal note, you were acknowledged as one of the top 100 Māori leaders in health in New Zealand. What can you tell us about that? Pretty exciting.
It is exciting, and I guess the first thing is that it now forces me to constantly look after my own health and well-being, James. It means I'm going to have to get out there every day now and walk an extra 2 kilometres so I can walk the talk. Listen, when I was told that I was going to be put on this website about 6 weeks ago, I actually thought that someone was playing a prank on me. I thought someone was pulling my leg.
Right.
And then when I realised that people had nominated me to be recognised for the work that I've done for over 20 years, it's actually quite a humbling experience.
Sure.
I don't know who they were, but I understand there were a number of people that had put my name forward, and I guess it does two things. It's a nice feeling, James. Like I said, I've been doing this for 2 decades, and there was a time when actually I felt quite tired because there's so few of us that work in these kind of diverse sectors, especially Māori practitioners and qualified Māori practitioners. So in a way, it was kind of like a nice pat on the shoulder. I didn't get a car out of it or a certificate.
A knighthood.
A knighthood. Could you imagine Sir Dr. Alexander Stevens II?
Yes, I can, actually.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
it says nice ring to it.
Oh, thank you. But it was nice to be recognised, and it also has a certain sense of responsibility. For those people that don't know, I also do a mentorship as well, and so I kind of look at the 4 gentlemen that I'm currently working with in their own respective areas, and think that leadership is a temporary mental, and what does that actually look like to help future generations?
Well, the great thing is you're still a young man, so there's still plenty more you can achieve, of course, with your... Why stop at 2 PhDs?
Go for 3. Well, here's one of the beautiful things. One of my mentees, Sione, and I'm just going to do a little shout out to my Tongan Doko, he actually wants to meet me PhD for PhD. I mean, this is how competitive he's become, right? And in my head, I thought I'm going to tell him I'm going to do 2. But if somehow he gets that, it's actually going to then force me to think, do I have to do a 3rd one?
Just to keep in front of the game.
That's right. I said to him, I'll recognise you as an equal. Until you're not, but there's a good example in terms of like working with men, working in a way that they feel empowered to help them to make their own decisions, their own mana motahake, their own independence. And I guess that's some of that stuff that kind of nourishes me and stops me burning out. One of the things that I've recently come to understand, James, is that in my initial counselling class, I'm the only one that's left, that all my other peers have subsequently left or burnt out, because it is a hard field. Many of them have now become accountants because apparently, see, this would be my nightmare, but apparently working with numbers seems to have a less traumatic impact on them. So well,
it's
interesting.
I mean, that's true. I often wonder how counsellors, psychologists and psychotherapists, how they cope mentally with... I mean, if you've had your own mental health challenges.
Yes.
Taking all of that grief and all of that mamai that you encounter...
Great word.
Yeah, it is. That you encounter over the times that you are therapizing.
Yes.
It's got to take its toll sometime, surely.
It does. I mean, you're working in areas... I often think that therapists, so psychologists, psychotherapists, counsellors, so on and so forth, we work in this area because we like to work with people. However, I don't think we realise the depth of darkness that we can often explore with other people. By the way, this shouldn't put listeners off. Go get therapy, right? So,
absolutely.
But and yet, people that work on this side, I often think, who counsels a counsellor, who social works a social worker, and you're absolutely right. I do have depression from time to time, but I mean, and to me, I'm really clear. When I see my own signs kind of coming up, I put things into action to help navigate my way towards wellness. And I'm also really clear with my own practice and with my clients that the things that I suggest and recommend, I wouldn't do. I wouldn't suggest to you unless I've actually done them myself. That way,
right.
At least you know that I am consistent with what I'm saying.
What are a couple of those things that you bring in to mitigate against the onset of depression?
Yeah, there's 3 key things that I do. One, I don't generally have friends that I work with in the counselling sector, because even if you see them after work hours, you'll bring it back with you. You just can't help it. You don't necessarily mention client names, but you might mention the different things that you're holding. So actually, primarily, I've started to associate more with people that are builders, sparkies, plasterers, because I would rather hear about their hassles about dealing with, I don't know, wiring and chipboard.
Gosh, you know all the lingo.
Oh, I do. And yet, you know, to me, I love it, James. You know what I mean? Because it has nothing to do with what I do, and I'd rather hear about someone being told that someone got their tools stolen off the truck than having to deal with anything else. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm very introverted, and so I need to kind of stockpile my energy so that when I do see people, I can give them the very best that I can. But I'm also mindful that actually at the end of the day, I'm pretty knackered, so I actually like to go for walks by myself or with some of my close friends, often in nature, so the beaches, the forests, things where I can just declutter. I don't bring my phone with me, or I turn my phone off, because there's nothing more, I guess, offensive for me than going for a nice walk where you see Mr. Tui and Mrs. Fantail, and then your bloomin' phone goes off. And then someone says, hey, I need you. So these are, I honestly believe these have been the three vital things that have kind of kept me sane all this time.
Final question before we head off to a break. How do you define success in your field?
Well, ideally, it's like to be in your field and not necessarily be doing numbers. Shout out to all my friends that are now accountants. I guess for me, success is also being able to see people years later. So it's been kind of serendipitous, I suppose, James, that over the last couple of months, I've had people that have reached out to me whom I haven't seen for, say, 10, 15 years, that have given me updates. You know, so they've either tried to reach out on LinkedIn or Facebook or the Standing Tall website, and they've said, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but you helped me with A, B, and C, and now I'm a dad with 2 kids. I'm happily married. I've been able to get to and I just wanted to say thank you. So I guess for me, success is having people who have come up to me to get help, and then actually be able to achieve what they want to. It's really quite beautiful in its own way.
Kia ora, hello, and welcome to BackChat with James King, and my guest this morning is Dr. Alexander Stevens II. We're talking about matters mental health, all things mental health, and especially at this Christmas time. So Merry Christmas to you. I have a track lined up here from the Black Seeds. It's called Everybody Knows. I know we were supposed to play some Christmas jingles, but you've got to draw the line somewhere.
Everybody knows it's what they don't. You shouldn't care what they talk about. You are the one, you are the one. Yeah, you shouldn't care what they talk about. You are the one, you are the one. Everyone knows. Everyone knows.
Kia ora, good morning. I'm James King. You're listening to BackChat with James King. We're talking this morning to Dr. Alexander Stevens II. Let's talk about, I'm throwing my pen up in the air. Let's talk about what kind of triggers people face in the Christmas season.
Yeah, so I know it might sound a bit glib that we're even having this conversation, but the reality is that people have lost other people this year, myself included, and we often tend to kind of focus on the spirit of Christmas in terms of being happy and merry, but I also think the spirit of Christmas is also about compassion and love. And part of being compassionate and expressing love is being able to show people that you care. And so there have been clients that I have worked with over this year who have voiced, which is kind of what I was thinking about, for today's show, James, who have lost their mum, their dad, their sister. And so this will be the first time without them in their life. And
I lost my mother at Christmas time 20 years ago, so
Wow.
I always think about her when it comes up to Christmas time.
Yeah, of course. And so I thought, actually, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how do we support people during this time who have lost others. Let's also talk about how sometimes it can be uncomfortable because we don't know what to do. That vital place that you as a support person or being a support person can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what do people need to know about grief during the Christmas season?
So sometimes, do you remember earlier this year we had someone called Danielle Oakes come in and she was talking about suicide, and when she was talking about suicide she was saying that sometimes we tend to kind of not deal with the topic, but we kind of make it a bit rosy coloured and we tend to kind of distract or delay talking about certain things in the hopes that it will make things better. But actually, look, grief is very similar, that we kind of, for some people, they don't feel comfortable talking about it, and so they'll tend to focus on things outside, the birds or how sunny it is, but actually that's not helping that individual. And actually, when we're working with people in grief, it's perfectly okay to say, look, I don't know how to have this conversation, but I can tell that you're sad, and what can I do? The temptation is also, and again, this is based on interacting with clients that I've had, is to try to cheer them up by forcing them to come with you to some Christmas event.
Oh, yeah.
In the hopes that somehow this might cheer them up. And especially if it's the first year, sometimes it might actually be better to just leave them by themselves for the first year. Now, that might seem counterproductive, but actually people, like what we said earlier, people need time to process. And actually, it's not necessarily bad for you to give them that space. I'm not saying to ignore them for Christmas Day by any stretch of the imagination, but what I'm saying to you is if they're saying to you, actually, I don't want to celebrate Christmas this year, then that's what they're telling you. There isn't any hidden code or decipher or some kind of hidden message that maybe they do and they're sending it to you in code. No, they really are saying, hey, I don't want to celebrate Christmas this year.
I did 10 Christmases by not going to family members.
Yes.
10.
Yes. And in fact, from what limited, and I do mean limited kind of resources or research I was able to find, it seems to be 2 to 3 Christmases, where people just want a bit of time. And actually, I find that, like I said, if you thought about Christmas in terms of the spirit of love and compassion, then allowing people to be able to do that, because we all grieve in our own ways. I know I certainly did. When I lost my sister, it must be like 11 years. The first couple of years, was hard. And yet, having that time to kind of process that, hey, she's not here right now. And then in successive years, I celebrate Christmas, but not perhaps in the way that I used to. But I am much more likely to kind of be around family members. Yeah.
We just gather round drinking and smoking.
They're probably talking about the new lax laws that have been introduced by this government.
Yes.
And I guess for us, we tend to kind of eat trifle and go into diabetic comas. So,
Sounds good to me.
We do our thing.
What support systems need to be in place for people in grief?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things. I guess the main one is acknowledging that that person is in grief and that their emotions can sometimes fluctuate. The analogy that I often use in my own therapeutic practice, it's like a roller coaster. Sometimes we're riding high and it feels amazing. Something will come along, and then we're on the downward spiral. So if this happens to be you, for example, I always try to encourage people, instead of going on a kind of roller coaster, actively working your way to kind of seeking a mid-ground, somewhere where, it's not too high, it's not too low. The Goldilocks effect actually could be another way of thinking about it. It's just right is really key. And so here are some things that you can do, for example. We know that going outside and walking, sounds a bit silly, but actually it has all kinds of benefits. Day, night, doesn't matter. Half an hour a day can be enough to stimulate those hormones in our brains that help regulate our emotions and make us feel good.
Are those endorphins?
Endorphins is one of them, yes. Yeah. Sometimes it can also help with our serotonin, so that's the stuff that helps us to rest as well, because people that are in grief can sometimes either sleep too much or not sleep at all. So again, it's very different. But something as simple as going for a walk, and like I said, half an hour outside, can have an overall impact in terms of how one is feeling. Another example that I encourage people to do is after you have a warm shower is to have 30 seconds of a cold shower. Oh, I know, right? I believe it or not, I do this, and it does two things. When that cold... GP advice if you've got other medical conditions. But generally speaking, for my clients, I suggest it, and it does two things. When that cold shower hits you, it brings you into the moment. So you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future. All you're thinking about is that cold water on your back, which is actually a form of mindfulness. So it's actually a really quick, effective way of kind of bringing you into the moment. What it also does is actually gives you a bit of a hit. It's a little bit of an endorphin hit. And believe it or not, over time, you actually get used to it. And it's something that I actually really enjoy now. I actually prepare myself for that hit, get it, and I genuinely feel better afterwards. As examples.
Very good. Would it be fair to say that loneliness and grief are bedfellows?
Yes, very much so. Especially if it's, say, an intimate partner or a child that you've lost, then yes, whether you've been together for 1 year or 60 years. I was thinking about the late Queen Elizabeth. Let's just throw in a bit of royalty. Where you could see it on her face after the Duke of Edinburgh had passed away, the look of grief that she had had. That he had been a consistent figure in her life, and all of a sudden had died of old age, clearly. But that absence, and it's very much the same. So they are bedfellows, and yet loneliness and grief we need to kind of slightly treat differently, because they're different forms in terms of how we express things. And yet, and like I said, so from a support person's perspective, it's really important that we kind of do our bits to address these two different elements so that they're not kind of lying in the same bed. I mean, initially it does make sense that they would.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and this is what I often say to people, is short term is understandable. Long term, let's try to get some help in there. What help looks like, of course, is just as individual as a thumbprint.
Right.
But let's start that kind of process.
What long-term impacts does this have on our mental health? So
let's go with, if left untreated, it can have significant impacts, especially on especially when it comes to our brain, because our brain loves routine and our brain loves to have things that are consistent. So if we are in the space and time of grief for long periods, we know that starts to impact on us not only emotionally but spiritually, physically, psychologically, even in the environment. So as a quick example, I supported someone last year who had lost both parents in a car accident, so that's quite a significant trauma. And it had been 2 weeks since I'd heard from them. They live out of Auckland. And I decided that I would go and see them. So I sent them text messages, and I was genuinely worried. I wasn't quite sure what was happening. Went to their house, and this person's house, I wouldn't say would normally be spotless, but it was an absolute tip. You know, there were clothes everywhere. There were unkept dishes. The poor cat had, you know, there were cat biscuits on the floor under the bowl, and I understood that this person was really, really in need of some aroha, some love. And even though initially they didn't actually want me there, I said to them, listen, you know, you actually need someone to be here. I'm going to do an intervention, and I'm going to do my bit. And so we kind of worked together, just focusing on one area. So I said, look, you know, we can't magically make you feel well. It's not possible. But how about we just do the dishes?
Yeah.
And then once we did the dishes and there was that little area, then, you know, how everything kind of shows out, sticks out. And then I said, well, why don't we just work on some laundry? And then over a period of a day and a half of driving back to Auckland down the line, once the house was no longer a tip state, but was actually clean and manageable, I did see a remarkable improvement in this person's behaviour. They did something which we had another guest this year called Chris, did like an aha moment. It was like and I remembered that moment and thinking, okay, they're now ready to kind of deal with some of that harder stuff, but at least now their room is in a state. I mean, one of the things I think of, psychologically speaking, James, is the often a room or a house can often be indicative of what's going on in someone's head. If we can help with the physical signs of what needs to be addressed, then psychologically they can often benefit from it.
I really believe that too. I've just started making my bed.
Congratulations. I've done that for a whole year now.
Yeah, and there's something about hopping in, seeing the bed made,
yes,
and then at the end of the day, hopping into that made bed.
Yes.
And there's something about it. You know, before I think you're right. It is an indicator of where your mind's at, whether it's made or unmade. But I force myself.
Can I be clear? Although I'm a therapist, I'm by no means a saint. Because I work anywhere between 12 to 14 hours a day, and I travel across the country, right? For me, knowing that I'm going to come home to a clean bedroom, a made bed, and an unimpressed cat that's hungry kind of does my day. And again, you know, I actually like things. So I started making my bed a year ago because I just used to go out the door and come back, and then I'd feel really glib and didn't quite understand. But now I actually make the effort. You know, I use a lot of essential oil, so I use peppermint, I use lemon, I use lavender as an example, because my floors are wooden, to mop my floor. So there's nothing better than having nice sunshine coming through the day with the door closed. You come home at night and you get like a waft of, you know, summer. That's right. And it is a beautiful experience, and I do encourage people to do it. In fact, it's one of the signs that I ask my, patients, clients, you know, if you could do one thing, it would be to make your bed. And it does help. Small things help over time. And
I think, too, you know, with this doing the dishes, vacuuming,
yes,
making the bed,
yes,
if you're doing that with someone else as well, you can talk, you can chat, you can take
yes,
you're much, I think, particularly for men,
yes,
you're much more able to communicate whilst you're actually doing something.
Yes. So here's the thing, and this is where I think my counselling practice is slightly different from other practitioners, is that I actually encourage people to clean. You know, I've got a couple of clients who are mechanics, so they might fix this because it's a kinesthetic thing. They have to do something in order to process. And sometimes they're a bit surprised that, you know, they'll say to me, "Oh, the last counsel I had to sit on a couch and I struggle with that," and I'll say to them, yes, that's why you're seeing a new therapist. So this therapist gives you permission. There's an individual that I know that loves to vacuum at the same time as talk, and when they have moments of clarity, they actually turn the vacuum off. And so, I didn't actually realise that. Then the vacuum goes on and I can hear great swooshing motions and actions as they're learning. So, you know, I wasn't trained to do that, you know, to be clear. But I realise that people process things differently, and if that's what you need to do, which is clean at the same time, then I say to them, hey, we've done two things. One, you've had a therapeutic experience. Two, your house is clean. And here's my invoice. Thanks very much for your time. Let's repeat the process a week later.
Very good. What isn't very good around suicide rates, what are they around the Christmas period?
Yeah, so both in New Zealand and Australia, we're not quite sure because there are multiple factors that lead to both suicide as well as suicide attempts. But what we do know is that the season holiday tends to impact people because it reminds us of family and friends. And if you've actually been disconnected or you've lost someone, then the absence, if we took one word away, it's wa, space and time, reminds us of the absence of something that we don't necessarily have. And we also know that when people who are feeling suicidal are calling through the holiday period, that isolation can be a key factor, or the other one actually to also think about, sorry, that's just popped into my mind, is also the cost of Christmas can be quite expensive too. There are many people in my life at the moment that are doing, not in therapy, that are doing double shifts and even triple shifts to make ends meet.
Right.
There are ongoing costs, for example, like bills. We know that inflation is massive at the moment, and we know that there's pressure. So for some of the men that I work with, they're currently working 2 jobs to try to make ends meet, plus their partner might be working at the same time. And often men who feel like they can't provide for their family can be really impacted by that, because it's that kind of perception that I'm the provider, and I should be doing my bit. So that's where some of those sorts of suicide can certainly come into the fray.
And where does violence come into this picture?
Unfortunately, it's very similar. So stressful times, sometimes you don't want to be with in-laws. Heck, you might not even want to be with your family, But either which way, violence rates definitely go up during the holiday periods. Often, again, because people are forced to be in a space. We saw that with COVID, for example. Domestic abuse rates went up, James, because people were in an isolated area. Now, thank goodness that it's a shorter amount of time than what we had with COVID. But nonetheless, being put in positions that you're uncomfortable with, money plays a huge part into it as well. Same deal in terms of suicide as well. Just in terms of people not feeling they can afford things, causes undue stress. I'll give you an example for me, although I'm not violent. Yesterday I got a bill from ACC to say that I had to pay my ACC levy of $450 now.
Wow.
Yep. Oh, and it was a reminder. Can I just say, it would be nice if I'd actually got the original letter, not just the reminder.
Sure.
So as someone who is self-employed, my business tends to shut down around December the 15th. So I have to work uber hard to make sure that I get enough money to cover me for, say, 6 to 7 weeks. So when that bill popped in, I did actually instantly feel stressed, and I thought, geez, where am I going to get an extra, because it wasn't factored, in my costs. So it's those little things that come unexpectedly that can often tip people over.
Merry Christmas if you're listening to the show. If you've just joined us, actually, we're talking to Dr. Alexander Stevens II about all things mental health and well-being for this Christmas period. Merry Christmas to you.
He has to be gorgeous. How fine we talking? Denzel Washington fine, or like he's cute? No, but that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, cuter than Denzel. Yes, he has to be super fine, fine his neck down. He has to have a great sense of humor, sensitive, very charming, no gut, washed, bored stomach. That's a 6-pack. I would settle for a 4.
What you know, what you know, what you know about a lady. What you know, what you know, what you know about a lady. Contemplating my window, I'm sitting on my lake. Unemotional, self-indulgent, heartless, useless. I thought if I loved you like that, you would love me right back. Love me, love me, love me, love me. What you know, what you know, what you know about a lady. What you know.
We've got Dr. Alexander Stevens II on the program this morning.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. What role does social media play to get support?
Great question, and it's a twofold question, James. Let me first say that I kind of preface this question by saying what kind of good, responsible social media plays in supporting people. So look, there are some really great websites in New Zealand. I actually think world-leading websites that are available, like depression.org, like the Mental Health Foundation has good links. They themselves have created some really robust resources that I've enjoyed seeing over the last couple of years.
StandingTall.nz, well, the StandingTallNZ.org is also in the mix.
Well, yes, and I will do a shout out that we were a finalist. I think it was either last year or the year before in terms of content and design. And actually, if we talk about the Standing Tall website, it's got most of those social media platforms that I'm talking about. They're actually available there. So to me, one of the challenges, is understanding that sometimes people don't know where to go. Whereas I've actually taken the hassle out and have put on, 8 different numbers, including Healthline. There's also something called the MSD directory. And so you might say, well, what's that? So the MSD directory is something that you can go onto, type in something like mental health, and it comes up with all the services that they fund, and you can even do it within specific regions. And most of it also includes the hours that they're available and what kind of help you can get. So that's just all on the one page on the standingtall.org website.
How would you approach someone who may need support?
Yeah. So again, it's dependent on context. So like I said, with my friend, I hadn't heard from him. So that to me was a sign, something's up.
Right.
Now, different people approach things differently. I'm pretty straight up, but I also note that some people don't like being or aren't comfortable with it, right? I always think that your intention is everything. So what are you wanting to do? What's your intention behind approaching this particular person? Is it that you want to make them feel worse by reminding them that they're not participating in society? Then that's probably not the best intention. But if it's because, say, for example, they haven't turned up to work, they haven't turned up to maybe a birthday, there's something that's happening, then actually, regardless of whether or not you feel uncomfortable or straight up, having a conversation, that you're noticing that things are happening around them, and what can you do to help, can in itself be a very powerful way of conveying that you're wanting to connect, that you genuinely care, and you're wanting them to help find a way forward.
And what ways might you go forward?
So let's talk about our men for a moment, yeah? So we know that our men don't want to often contact 0800 numbers initially. However, once they get past their fear of, this is for weak people and this is for people that are soft, and I actually hear that there are some pretty decent people on the other side, but then I have a bias because, I do look a lot of phone counselling, for example. Actually, people describe it like a breath of fresh air. So sometimes it's about showing support of ringing them. Now, this, again, I'm not saying that this works for everyone, but sometimes sit down with that person and get them to call. Then then walk out, because at least you're showing that you care.
Right.
Sometimes you also need to find the right service. So I do get feedback from clients that I've worked with that have said, look, I've called this 0800 number and I didn't like it. I might encourage them to try a different number. At the same time, I also might think, well, geez, hopefully this second experience might go well. Is there like a third option? So I'm not saying to you that, you ring this 0800 number and it's going to be the miracle upon miracles during the Christmas season. But if you don't get what you want, try a different number. You'd be surprised. And actually, if I think about it, it's like any good therapist or counsellor. It's not possible for every single person to have the right therapist the first time. I know when I try to find someone called an external supervisor, so that's someone that I talk to and I'm, once a month to process stuff, it took me a while. And it's the same deal with counsellors. I've had people that have had 4 or 5 different counsellors before they found me. So not every number works, but here's the thing, they do work when you do have the ability to, and confidence to reach out and get the right kind of person.
So how would you handle a situation where someone has disclosed suicide?
Yes. So there's two things, and in fact this is very similar to mental illness as well as sexual abuse. First things first, don't panic.
Right.
First things first, don't panic. Second thing, recognise that this person has come to you in distress. And then third thing is actually ask them what they want to do with that information. Because actually across all three, so mental health, suicide and sexual abuse, sometimes just telling a person can be enough. And they might not actually want you to come up with all the answers. They might actually just want to just let someone know, hey, this is what's happening to me, or this is what has happened to me. And then kind of go from there. So those would be the first things that I would say. Don't panic. Yeah. Personally, I just take a step back and actually ask them, what can I do to help?
In your opinion, what's the best way people can look after themselves?
Recognise that when you need help, go get it. The sooner you get help, the sooner you're going to feel supported. I know, having worked with, like I said, James, I've worked with over 7,000 people, close to 20 years, all range of things. And for many of our men, I know that can be this perception of I'm perfectly capable of helping myself. However, if I spoke to you within a clinical perspective, I'd say to you, if that was the case, you wouldn't be in the position that you are now. Right. There's absolutely nothing wrong asking for help. Even if you've grown up in a family where it was seen as weakness to even contemplate getting help, here's the thing, is that you're in pain, you need to get some kind of help, and this is what I would warmly suggest that you do.
Can you share an experience of loss that impacts at this time of year? Yeah,
so look, to those of us who know this feeling, I had my favourite cat, Carlos, who I'd had for 15 years, had passed away, and my Labrador, Ray, had also passed away. 2 different events, by the way. Both of them, one from old age, and the other one was unfortunately hit. My cat Carlos was hit by a car. And so I know that for many of us, because New Zealanders do feature highly in the world in terms of having one or more animals,
yes,
is that they can actually, that sense of grief can actually be of equal towards losing a person. And then I've also lost people through suicide as well. So, so this Christmas, for example, there is times where I've been reflecting on certain traditions that I would do with my animals, for example, that are no longer there. As a quick example, James, I had to put my dog bowl and cat bowl, I donated them to charity. I finally decided that actually it's time.
It's time.
And one of the things that I'm doing with my mum, and I know that this is a tradition that other people do, is that they head to the cemetery on either Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, which is what we're doing, to acknowledge those that we have lost. Another thing that I do suggest to our clients, depending if that's what you want to do, is sometimes people can make their own Christmas decorations. Hospice, as you may recall, sometimes in supermarkets would have the ability to write someone's name on a tag, on a bauble that you could then put on a tree and acknowledge that person. So there are meaningful things that you can actually do to and embrace loss. And I guess that's what the key message is you can hold loss and you can grieve loss, but at some point it's about how do you do it in a way that's actually cathartic for you.
Okay, let's look at what reflections you have for the year.
What a year. Actually, you first, James. You first. Chuck me at least one reflection that you've had this year, and I'll give you 3. How about that?
I think that's good. I think the election has obviously been a highlight. I'm picking an easy one to begin with. And it's a worrisome 3 years we have ahead.
Agreed.
But that's what I would pick.
I would, and I guess it's only because it's only been in the last month or so that all these different things have been announced. But certainly I'm a little bit intrepid about what does this new government look like, since there's been a number of social policies that have been introduced. A part of me that the non-counsellor, the non-clinician part looks and just thinks, you know what, our country really isn't in a good state. we still have what I call COVID trauma, where lots of things we're picking up are being affected. And I guess for me, aside from that, I guess the highlights for me is having 3 mentees that are just going from success to success and being able to put to bed some of the things that I've needed to in order to put new things ahead, like doing this new PhD in theology.
Gosh, I can't wait.
Well, it's timely, right? Since it's the Christmas season.
Yes.
So, but from that, James, I guarantee you 3 things. Next year, when we meet up again, I'll hopefully at least have 1 book up and out, with 2 more coming, specifically looking in my areas.
I believe you. I believe you. So what are you up to for Christmas? We've got a minute.
Yeah, so look, spending time with my family, spending time by myself, and actually really thinking to myself, where do I want to go from here? I've been doing this for 20 years. Do I have another 10 years in me?
Well, that brings us to the end of the program on this Christmas Eve. We look forward to Christmas Day. A Merry Christmas to you and to you, Alexander.
Season's felicitations.
Absolutely.